Mixed reactions as the National Police Service unveils new uniform designs for its officers 5 years after the last uniform change.
Cabinet sets in motion the process of abolishing the National Health Insurance Fund, NHIF, and replacing it with three new ones: the Primary Healthcare Fund, Social Health Insurance Fund, and Emergency, Chronic and Critical Illness Fund.
And across the borders, Zimbabwe's main opposition party demands a rerun of last week's election, citing electoral flaws and calls on other African countries to help mediate in its impasse with the ruling party.
Well, good morning. This is the Morning Cafe, 13 years after the promulgation of the Constitution. That is a big conversation this week. And today on Morning Cafe, that will be the biggest conversation. So do stand by for that. My name is Fred Indimuli.
And I'm Flora Limuki, and later on at around 8 a.m. we'll be speaking to the Vice Chairperson of the National Integration and Cohesion in the country, Wambui Nyoto, to tell us a story of rising from campus politics all the way to being the youngest commissioner in the country.
All right, and consequentially, we'll be speaking to a counseling psychologist to help us understand mentally what does it do to you when you try to rise above all these particular ladders. But this morning, even as Zimbabwe is calling on other African countries to chip in, well, we have seen the script even here in Kenya. I give you a proverb from Zimbabwe: two rats cannot share the same hole. Think about that all the way today. I'm used to Stanley Nyarungeta. Good morning.
To the top story now, the National Police Service is set to phase out the current general duty police uniforms once it concludes a public participation exercise that starts today in Nyeri. A team from the police headquarters will go countrywide to involve officers and the public as it seeks feedback on the latest design change. The new proposed uniforms feature a light blue shirt and navy blue pants for both genders. Additional features on the new uniform include the Kenya Police logo on the left hand and the Kenyan flag on the right. The uniform will also have inbuilt name tags that do not give police officers the room to remove. Other accessories including sweaters, trench coats and reflectors will accompany the uniform that comes in long and short sleeves. And so this morning we ask, what do you think of the proposed new police uniform? You can share your feedback at TV47 News on X and on Facebook, TV47 Kenya. And just before we take a look at the dailies, let's get the day's diary.
Right, it is actually Limuki giving us the diary. What is happening today, Limuki?
Actually, we do have a lot in the intro today. And first and foremost, it's the International Day of Ending Enforced Disappearances, and today we mark that International Day of Victims of Enforced Disappearances, which will be marked in Mathare at New Mathare Nursery School in Kiamaiko. This event also is a call for the decriminalization of enforced disappearances in Kenya. And the talk of the town, the new police uniforms, National Police Service has unveiled new uniforms for police and invited the public for participation on their opinions on that. And of course, that is our question of the day as well concerning that new uniform of the police. And KDF recruitment enters day 3, even as 2 suspects are arrested in Malindi for soliciting for bribes from the applicants. And away from that, the World Coin Probe Committee today continues with their investigations as they intend to meet the Solicitor General later today. And as of yesterday, it was revealed that thousands of Kenyans who scanned their eyeballs in exchange for money from WorldCoin may not even have received it. After all, it has emerged that also the probe on the matter to continue today with the National Assembly Ad Hoc Committee selected to look into that matter. And the wars of CS Ababu Namwamba continues as now the Nandi Senator Samson Cherargei starts a fresh push for the CS to resign, blaming him for letting the ministry down. And of course, interestingly, the senator said yesterday that the recent athletics championships that were held in Budapest, that Kenya did not perform well, even as we saw us having their 10 medals. So it is a fresh push from the Senate now on Ababu Namwamba. And it is the Senate Ad Hoc Committee that's pushing for the compensation to the Kenyan victims of the 1998 U.S. Embassy terror attack is slated to meet with the CS Foreign Affairs, Dr. Alfred Mutua, today to deliberate on the measures his ministry has put in place to ensure the U.S. government compensates the victims, bearing in mind that the U.S. has good foreign relationship with Kenya. And away from that, it's National Holistic Pet Day. There's a day set up to try and bring more publicity to the idea that holistic treatments where pets' lifestyle, diet and environment are fully considered are more beneficial for the temporary health and also impacting their longevity. That is what we have on our diary this morning. Of course, we keep on updating you as we move on with the show. Do you have a pet? And
I was actually curious, if it's not a cat or a dog, which other pet will you have?
You'd have a bird, any type of a bird.
Apart from, Najua Fred say he's thinking about kuku.
No, I can't keep a chicken pet. You don't eat your pets, you know.
Right.
So probably something like a horse or something else that I cannot eat.
Interesting.
Because you never know when the hunger pangs strike.
Right.
Let's now take a look at the dailies this morning, and we start off with the Standard. The big headline on the Standard today: take back the death threats, leaders tell Ruto. Integrity crisis, President acts leaders and civil rights activists with his remarks to sugar investors, telling some they will either leave the country or he will jail them or escort them to their maker. The story is on page 2. Let's take a look at some of the quotes there. One by Stuart Mazayo, the Senate Minority Leader: even though Mr. Rai is being accused of frustrating the revival of the sugar industry, there are better ways to address this other than a president issuing callous threats. Another quote there by the LSK President Eric Theuri: the demand we are making to the president is not only for him to withdraw and apologize, but to allow the due process of law to take its course to its logical conclusion. That's a big headline on the Standard today. Another big story on the front page of the Standard: judges Uhuru denied jobs seeking payment. The judges have moved to court seeking compensation, claiming they were victims of impunity, and no reason was given for them being denied promotions. The story is on page 4, and it lists Justice Agri Muchelule, Justice Weldon Korir, Justice Joel Ngugi, Justice George Odunga among those who have moved to court seeking payment for the period they were denied jobs. Another highlight on the front page: KQ blames dollar for record 21 billion shilling loss. The story is on page 6. It's just been highlighted on the front page. 21 billion shillings loss. Wow. On the top strip of the Standard this morning: Western seeks to chart course without trailer. This is the politics of the day, and it comes on the back of the president's 5-day tour of the Western region. Now, Western seeks to chart course without trailer. That's a highlight on for the story on page 8 of the Standard. The highlight is on the front page. On the world scene, Mali music star backs school leaders. And in sports, what went wrong for marathoners in Budapest? That's the front page of the Standard this morning.
Well, and on the Daily Nation, pretty much the same headline: a president's wrath, they say smart or reckless. President William Ruto is a man on a mission to deliver on his campaign promises and the expectations of many Kenyans hoping for a break from the high cost of living. But even as he sets out to crush rampant cartels and revive the ailing sugar sector, his recent broadsides on the ownership of Women Sugar Company has stirred up a storm. And There is a quote of the president saying, "Will not entertain any court cases. They should either withdraw the cases or go themselves." I told them there are only three things if they want to cause trouble. They either leave the country, I take them to jail, or they go to heaven. That story is on page 7 of the Daily Nation this morning. And on the right strip of the Daily Nation, Babu walks free in DJ Evolve's shooting case. Embakasi Member of Parliament Babu Owino is a free man after being declared of any wrongdoing in the shooting and wounding of Felix Orinda, aka DJ Evolve, 2 years ago. That story is on page 10 of the Daily Nation. And some matters business there. KQ loses double on debt, weak shilling. The national carrier KQ has more than doubled its half-year losses after it reported a 217 billion shillings hole in the 6 months ending June 2023. And away from that, MPs now plot to unplug Kenya Power monopoly. The consumers will have a choice to buy electricity tokens directly from either independent power producers, IPPs, or Kenya Power. If MPs approve a proposal contained in a report of a parliamentary committee. This is in a bid to tame the utility firm's monopoly. The National Assembly Department Committee on Energy is proposing to have IPPs, through the help of KenGen, sell power directly to consumers as one of the ways of reducing the high cost of living. And in numbers there, 23 billion shillings is the lawmakers are targeting cancellation in phases of the contract in 5 IPPs currently being paid a combined 23 billion shillings annually. And on the top strip of the Daily Nation this morning, tough times as Kenyans withdraw 30.8 billion shillings as savings from SACCOs. And away from that, the changing face of police uniform on page 8 there. That's where you can find the new look for the police. Yeah.
And Taifa Leo also has the same on the top strip. Sare za polisi zabadilishwa japo ni blue. Idara ya polisi yaalika maoni kutoka kwa raia kuhusu sare mpya. Is on Taifa Leo. And in Matter Sports, still on the top strip, Lukaku sasa kujiunga na AS Roma. Nyota huyo aenda Italia baada ya Chelsea kumkataa ingie kambini mwao. Katika ukurasa wa 20. Mbali na hayo, shamba la mauti. Wenyekiti wa kampuni hii ya kununua mashamba akiwemo Bwana Muhuri Mushiri aliaga dunia mwaka 2006. Bwana Kariuki Mwaganu aliaga mwaka 2009. Bwana Mwangi Thuita aliaga dunia mwaka 2018, na Bwana James Njoroge aliaga dunia mwaka huu. Walifariki katika mazingira ya kutatanisha. Ajabu ni kwamba wote walikumbana na mauti ghafla, huku ripoti za upasuaji wa maiti zikisema walikumbwa na mshtuko wa moyo. Kamili katika ukurasa wa 2. Na shamba hili la mauti ni Embakasi Ranching Company, ambayo Taifa Leo yasema kuwa yageuka kuwa uwanja wa kifo kwa wasimamizi, hasa wenyekiti wanaouawa kiajabu. Mbali na hayo, katika masuala ya mahakama, Babu Owino aondolewa mashtaka, na mahakama ya Nairobi yaondolea mbunge wa Embakasi mashtaka ya kupiga risasi DJ Evolve. Kwingineko ni kwa juhudi za Ruto kufufua viwanda. Sekta ya sukari imelemazwa na sukari inayoagizwa kutoka nje ya nchi kwa njia haramu. Kurasa wa 4. Nje ya nchi ni kuwa Biden alani mauaji ya weusi USA. Kwenye kisa cha hivi punde zaidi, mwanaume mzungu aliua watatu dukani. Hayo ni habari katika Taifa Leo. Fred, I don't know if you have Business Daily there.
I do have the People Daily.
Okay.
And on the front page of the People Daily, the big headline is Super Salaries, CEOs Targeted. Facing pay chops, top managers in state firms, some of which are struggling, are in President's crosshairs after he said SRC must answer as to why the bosses earn over 2 million shillings a month. That story is on page 4 of the People Daily. And a quote by the president, "We've discovered that there are people in parastatals and other institutions who earn more than what the president gets. Which jobs are they doing?" The other big headline on the front page of the People Daily today is, yes, that pictorial of the new police uniform. How do we look? Police seek public views on proposed uniform. The Kenya Police Service officers display the proposed uniform as part of a campaign to get wananchi and fellow officers' opinions before they change from the current blue one. And remember, that forms our top story today. What do you think of the proposed new uniforms for the police service? Other stories making it to the front page of the People Daily this morning. MPs blame Shylocks for boda rider deaths. This is a special report on page 5 of the People Daily. Legislators pile pressure on police to crack down on syndicates that they accuse of murders just when borrowers are about to clear bike loans. Wow. Interesting. And yes, Budapest lessons for Kenya. That is a headline in as far as sports is concerned on the People Daily as well. And those are the stories that feature on the front page of the People Daily this Wednesday.
Well, from the BD to the
People Daily.
PD to the
PD to BD.
Yes. On the People Daily this morning, the top headline there, Kenya's 2,800 shillings per second betting market rivals NSE. That's the top headline there. And Kenyans stacked a record of 88.5 billion shillings through online bets in the full year to June 2023, defying a heavy crackdown on the sector and punishment and punitive taxes introduced in the period. That is as far as matters betting are concerned. And still the story that we've seen in most dailies this morning, weak shilling debt sink KQ into 21 billion shillings half-year loss. And still on the Business Daily on the right strip, we have savers cash out that 1 billion shillings SACCO savings on woes. Kenyans have cashed out 30.8 billion shillings of the money from savings and credit cooperative societies since last year, as economic hardships characterized by rising cost of living pushed them to the edge. And MPs disclosed plot to end Kenya Power monopoly as they now seek Kenyans to directly get power from the independent power producers, that is the IPPs. That is all pegged if the proposal in a report by the parliamentary committee is passed in the National Assembly. And away from that, banks' half-year profits defy tough times to hit 156 billion shillings.
Right, I'm trying to see if I can get the star here. Fred, if you have it, before you cross the borders.
I don't have the star today, unfortunately, so I guess it's time that we cross the borders. And we start off with Uganda today. I've seen the Daily Monitor. In Uganda, the big headline on the Daily Monitor, Museveni gift to clan heads splits Buganda. Revelations that President Museveni authorized the purchase of a piece of land for 16 clan leaders and chiefs near the official seat of the Buganda Kingdom in Bulange Mengo in Kampala have ruffled feathers among the establishment's officials who say they were kept in the dark on the deal-making meeting. And that's a big headline in Uganda. That's what they're talking about there.
Okay.
And check what's headlining in Tanzania.
Yes, definitely. And on Tanzania, we go with The Citizen. LATRA identifies 6 regions for cable transport. Whole matters boosting the transport sector in that country. So the LATRA is basically the Land Transport Regulatory Authority, studying the possibility of introducing cable transport in at least 6 regions as part of wider efforts to boost tourism in the country and to facilitate commuting in some areas. You can read through that on page 4. So give you a whole, after conducting initial studies, we identified Mbeya, Iringa, Tanga, Morogoro, Arusha and Kilimanjaro as having great potential for introduction of cable transport. I don't know where we are in matters cable transport in Kenya. Probably should be benchmarking in Tanzania for this. Anything else really here? Matters East Africa set to benefit from Ethiopia BRICS entry, says Envoy. That is on page 2. That is on The Citizen this morning. You also do have Monanchi, Flo?
Ya Mwananchi, katika gazeti la Mwananchi hii leo ni top headline there, katiba mpya bado ya moto, nia ya serikali kutaka kutoa elimu ya miaka mitatu kwa umma ibua mjadala mkali miongoni mwa wananchi wakiwa na mawazo tofauti. Na vilevile katika gazeti la Mwananchi hii leo, misuguano ya uchaguzi isivyoacha watu salama, na pia wameangazia sababu miswada ya rasilimali inakwama huko. Na mbali na hayo, sakata la upigaji Mbeya, madiwani watajwa, mmoja toroka sakwa. Well,
interesting that even in Tanzania, the main discussion this week is on constitution review. But now the government says they'll have to conduct civic education for a period of 3 years before they can revisit the debate. And that is what I think the opposition is opposing. They're saying the 3 years are just too long. Miaka mitatu ni mingi sana kwa elimu ya katiba.
And also interesting enough, the whole headline on misuguano uchaguzi isivyoacha watu salama. Right now, even as the bipartisan talks continue, matters the 2022 polls, and even as they continue having more discussions on the polls, we can also see Zimbabwe still healing.
Yes, they're very much following the Kenyan script. After the elections. Now the opposition says they're actually demanding for a rerun. And calling for African leaders to actually mediate in that impasse in Zimbabwe. It is a story we're following. It's on the highlights today. But remember our top story today on the police uniforms. And the question we are asking, what do you think about the proposed new uniform for police? And you can keep sending your feedback at TV47 News on X and on Facebook, TV47 Kenya. And I think now twende kwenye maswala ya karakacha, Stanley.
Oh yes, even as we also go there, I'm reminded that during last year's election campaign, Kenya Kwanza had rejected the whole uniform and proposed to abolish it once in power. So I don't know if it is changing tunes or
fulfillment of a campaign promise.
They have delivered.
So we definitely have to see how that will go. But then now into matters, today's caricature on Daily Nation, that is on page 17, a big man there with a lapel written tax, and a smaller man there. There's a bread, a loaf of bread there, pay rise. So probably the big man is the government, shadowing a common Mwananchi. Wants a piece of the loaf of bread there. And on the Standard this morning, which page is it? On page
14.
Page 14, yes. Ball Sugar Wars, a caricature that looks like President William Ruto holding 3 cards, white, red, and yellow. White, move out. Yellow, go to jail. Red, fly to heaven.
Oh, I think that one wins it for me.
Mambo ni mangapi?
Matatu.
Mambo ni matatu.
Well, it's interesting. It is what is featuring on the front pages of the Daily Nation and the Standard today. A lot of people have commented on this. Well, it's one of those dicey discussions to even have. A remark attributed to the president himself. And, well, there are those who are demanding for an apology and a withdrawal of the same. Whether or not that will happen, we wait to see.
It's curious if it was a gaffe from the president himself, or if he had thought through what he was going to say about.
I think he hadn't thought. Those are things that just come out in the heat of the moment. And it's hard to see such a statement from a sitting president. And definitely you'll see the hit from the human rights defenders as well as activists for him to retract his words.
Oh yes, and actually, you know, the fact that you speak about human rights defenders, I'm reminded one Dr. Kurokot, who is going to join us, and I'm curious his sentiments on the same as a human rights defender.
Yes, this morning, as part of our panel, we're having lawyer Paul Masharia for this discussion today, 13 years After the promulgation of the Constitution 13 years on, is it time to change the Constitution? Dr. Isaac Kalua, Green Ecopreneur, Party Leader, Green Thinking Action Party, will also be in studio. And Dr. Ekuru Okot, Constitution expert and also Party Leader, Third Way Alliance. He was behind the Punguza Mizigo Initiative for Constitution Review, and he'll be joining us as well for that big discussion. But remember our question this morning: what do you think about the proposed new uniform for the police? And keep on sending your feedback at TV47 Kenya on X. No, TV47 News is handle on X. TV47 Kenya is our page on Facebook. And we'll be back with that discussion after the break. Don't go too far. You're watching Morning Cafe. Welcome back. You're watching Morning Cafe with me, Fred Indimuli, on TV 47, and we will now want to get down to business, discussing the Constitution at 13. Today we're privileged to have in studio lawyer Paul Macharia. We also have in studio Dr. Ekuru Aukot. He's a constitution expert, party leader, Third Way Alliance, and he was behind the Punguza Mzigo initiative. Dr. Aukot was also the director of the Committee of Experts on the Constitutional Review. We're still hoping to have Dr. Isaac Kalua Green in studio as a party leader, Green Thinking Action Party, and he's among the team of eminent Kenyans behind the latest popular initiative to review the Constitution. Gentlemen, karibuni sana.
Thanks, Fred.
It is a big discussion this week as we mark 13 years since the promulgation of the Constitution. But before we even get to the issues of changing the Constitution, we've had a Constitution for 13 years. And the question is, now that we are talking about, and we've had instances where we have attempted to amend, but those who feel that we've not even had this document long enough to even try and change some of the aspects there. Did we set the bar too high, that we've not been able to implement some obvious provisions that we're now even saying we should go back and change it? Let's start with you, Paul. Issues to do with gender inclusion, issues to do with Chapter 6 on integrity and leadership. These are issues that we've not been able to deal with conclusively, yet we're talking about changing the Constitution. Did we set the bar too high?
So thank you so much, Fred. And I think the bar was not set too high. And that question ought to be understood in the context of what is the political culture that we have in our country and what drives the political preferences that are made. You have seen, and all of us have seen, if it is anything to do with the benefit of the political class, there is so much haste into implementation of such a law. But when it is to the general good of the people, then there is some hesitation, which we ought to understand from where we have come from. Of course, having come from the colonial regime, and where we did not even so much value the inclusivity leadership, then that can explain. And of course, the Kenyan society is greatly chauvinism, or there is undermining of the female voice. That has been so much entrenched so that it is not easy to do away with it overnight. So it's a process. I would say it's a process. Then it's a process that is way long due, because we have come to a point where we have witnessed the voice and the value of the inclusivity leadership. We have seen what are some of the benefits we can get by having everyone on board. And of course, the Constitution tries to bring some of the principles like public participation, and also reducing the extent of discrimination. Of course, as much as those are the principles on the book, then there is still a question of implementation, political goodwill, and political preference. Still, our politicians, who are the main drivers in the implementation of the Constitution, they are still hesitant to implement some of the laws that, by and large, will benefit the great population and the great number in the country. So I think it's a challenge, and I think we did not overreach in terms of the provision, because society is driven by the law. The law is made to serve the society. But then what we need to realize, when you look at the data, the number of male and the female, it's almost equal, if not greater. So then what does that mean? If we have to have a democracy governed by the rule of law, which envisage and respects participation, inclusivity, accountability. We have to take care of every group, every unique group. So then I think it's the high time we focus on what is the common goal and what is for the benefit of all of us. it's a failure on part of the parliament having failed to implement that law. Because today we are talking about having a law that allows more women in leadership. Going forward in future, we will have, if we don't pass this law, then the events will overtake us, so that then it will be the men who will be claiming, let us have a law that allows us also to be included. So this law is supposed to serve the benefit and the public good. But the reasons why we've not implemented it, it's not very clear. I think we can attribute the hesitation to the personal wish, lack of political goodwill, and also the political preference of the political class.
But Dr. Okwot, some may argue that some of the, probably we set the bar a bit too high, that there are things that we were just trying out to see if it's possible, but we've not managed to get even the formula right, especially on the gender issue. Even things like Chapter 6, that probably even as a society we're not that upright to actually demand for that.
So Fred, I'm very happy that you actually mentioned Chapter 6, because I think one of the geniuses of Kenya's constitution, and I've said this for the longest time, is actually that chapter on leadership, because it is a realization that right from the agitation for our independence from colonialism to post-colonialism to the agitation for multi-party democracy, one of the biggest failures we have had in this country is the kind of leadership that we've had. So much so that Kenyans decided that in our new constitutional dispensation, we want a certain type and character of leaders. That the leaders who, when they swear by this document, they will actually do what they say they will do during election times or while in that office. Now, we did not set the bar too high. The reason being, a constitution of any country is actually the will of the people. It is what the people want. It's how the people want to be governed. And you will see from our own constitution, right from Article 1, it actually speaks about sovereign authority. The sovereign authority vests in the people of Kenya. Not in the leadership, but in the people of Kenya, including that leadership, that they can exercise that sovereign authority and power directly or indirectly through their elected representatives. Now, that also means, Fred, that if you are then given the opportunity to go, to be in an office in this country, then you must go back to what do the people of Kenya want or expect of me in this constitution. Now, let's go back to the basics. When you look at the constitution of any country, you're talking about it is social, economic, political, and even cultural manifestation. So it is all those aspects. And if you are to draw parallel from the old constitution, what we call the independence constitution, let's pick, for example, just the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights in the old constitution only focused on political rights, actually, not even civil. It focused on political rights. There was nothing like the right to food, right to water as we do today, housing, property. But in the making of our new constitution, Kenyans said, no, wait a minute. We need to look at all the aspects of our society. And that's why you can even see in Chapter 4, the Bill of Rights, you will see group rights included, environmental rights, that we are now thinking about younger members of society, elder members of our society, women, youth, children. And we're speaking about those aspects. So, who is failing the implementation of this constitution? Because you go back again to the two theories, two facts about a constitution. There is a constitution making process, but there is also the constitution implementation process. Now, constitution implementation, the making of it, of course, involves the people. The implementation aspect of it also now requires who has the duty to do what in what department. If it is matters rights, if it matters environment, if it matters land, all those aspects, then we are calling upon those office holders to actually live up to that constitution. Wakili has spoken heavily about the question of accountability, respect of the constitution. Does the current leadership actually, respect this constitution? The question largely is no. Why? Because in the history of our country and leadership, there has been a lot of personalization. That when people think about amending the constitution or making a law, they think about themselves. They think about those offices. That's why today, I call them useless political bipartisan talks at Bomas, because the outcome of it, first of all, they want to make it look national. There's nothing national about Azimio and UDA meeting at Bomas of Kenya to talk about Kenyans. If they really wanted to make it national, open it up to the public. Article 10 of the Constitution of Kenya talks about public participation. And the courts of law in this country have made decision that it is not just about public participation. It has to be what we call meaningful public participation. That you must demonstrate you've actually gone to the people.
Yeah.
I mean, look, if you look at, for example, the way BBI, and I'm happy that it failed, because it was very cosmetic. You know, they go to very selected places in very high-end, hotels, and then they call it public participation. There was never.
Okay, and we'll come back to that issue of the current processes going on. But still on this issue of implementation and the disconnect between what we aspire to as a country and what we've managed to do so far. And it would appear that even the general public is disconnected with the kind of ideal they aspire
before
to.
Wakili comes, Fred, I wanted to say that besides the political class or the office holders, the Constitution has also bestowed duty and responsibility on the general public.
Yes.
To first of all, respect, protect, and uphold the Constitution. That's Article 3.
Yes.
Now, when the leadership, the duty or office holders are not implementing this Constitution as per the aspiration of the people, then the people must rise up.
Okay, we're seeing a disconnect because the people have had opportunity. Let's say on the issue of leadership and integrity, they've had opportunity to change their leadership at least 3 times since the promulgation of the Constitution. Just before the elections last year, the Interior CS then, Fred Matiang'i, said that by the look of things, a lot of the people who are going to get elected into Parliament are going to be probably people engaging in money laundering, meaning that the electorate is not keen on Chapter 6, on integrity as well, on issues of gender representation and inclusivity. The electorate is not keen to elect enough women. Back to the question, did we set the bar too high? The Kenyans and the Constitution they promulgated are not in tandem.
So what I think is happening, Constitution is a document that in essence ought to govern various aspects of society, starting with the economic aspect, political aspect, socio-cultural aspects. The management and the guidance offered by the Constitution instill some values. These values are instilled in the people who are who have the ultimate authority to amend, and the electorate. Now, what happens when you look at, for example, Chapter 6? It was the wishes of the people that the leaders conduct themselves in a manner that is in accordance to the positions they hold. But then, these leaders elected, they are the representation of the people who have elected them. If they do not act as per the authority given by the people electing them, the people have mandate to decide on what to do to them based on the inception of the Constitution. But what happens? These people, the values that they are expected to exhibit, even when they do not exhibit them, we overlook it. Yeah?
Then we expect them to change.
And we expect them to change. I mean, it's a bit paradoxical for us to have an expectation, have our wishes, but then when we are called upon to choose between subject A and subject B, we choose subject B, notwithstanding the misdoings and misguiding of the subject B. And I think when you look at the role, when we go back to the role of the IEBC, which is one of the independent offices created by the Constitution, and specifically on the issue of the civic education and the public participation, those tenets ought to be meaningful and carried out in a manner that ensures that there is robust understanding of the process. But then you see, the people who in essence ought to guide, to lead, and to champion when there is infringement, when there is impending infringement, or when there is any manner of abrogation of the rights provided in the Constitution. They're supposed to be taking actions. They are the same people who, when they are supposed to take actions, they take around about turn. When, for example, when it is on record that somebody either abused another one or used a language that does not correspond to their position, or they are engaged in the stealing of the public money, or they are engaged in conducts that do not resonate to their position, we the people sometimes celebrate them. I mean, it's instead of calling them out, as we are supposed to do, we celebrate them. And another issue has been, when you are supposed to call out the issue, then we focus on the personality. So that then, when Fred is accused of something, we rise and say, he is being accused because he works in TV47. Rather than focusing on the issue, whether is it true or is it not true that he has done whatever he is alleged to have done. Now, when we politicize, and when we personalize issues of national interest, then the leaders, we are supposed, or we expect them to uphold the values that are supposed to be upheld by the Constitution. They cannot uphold them. Yeah. And then that also puts us in a position we cannot question them, because we allowed it to happen. We cannot question them.
Dr. Okot, it's because we criticize the leaders a lot. We call them out. We accuse them of all manner of ills. And especially on this issue about Constitution, we put all the blame on the leadership. Yet, we get the leaders that we deserve.
Okay, to be fair, the blame has to be apportioned both ways. Because as the saying goes, that the leadership of any country is a reflection of that society. And therefore, we have to prick the conscience of Kenyans to say, okay, who actually do you elect into leadership? What do you consider when electing these people? What do they say to you? And do you actually believe them to be able to implement the things they say? Because now that the reflection about whether we are actually implementing this constitution or not is about your will failing at that point of implementation. Now, that's okay. We can also apportion blame to the people. But let's also, Fred, focus on the question of leadership. What really does it mean? If you say, I'm a leader, you are leading your people to where? Okay? So, comparatively, most African countries, including Kenya, have this crazy idea of benchmarking with other countries. Why are you benchmarking with other countries? Because you are benchmarking with them because you know that the leadership in that country has achieved certain aspects in those countries. If it is economic, for example, prosperity, if it is infrastructural, then that now brings us to the question of what is the leadership in Kenya doing about realizing the intentions and the goals of the people of Kenya in a constitution. So now we cannot excuse the leadership. Because how can we, for example, excuse someone like the President William Ruto, when he knows that in the Constitution, there is no position called Prime Cabinet Secretary as a member of the Cabinet. When he knows in the Constitution, there is nothing called Chief Administrative Secretary. And yes, under Article 132, Sub-Article 4, he could actually create an office in the public service, but on advice of the Public Service Commission. Not political persuasion, not political rewarding of friends or individuals. Now, that's why for me the leadership is actually failing to uphold the will of the people. But the people of Kenya did not actually, could not be blamed so much, because in Article 104, for example, what we call the right to recall, they say that we will give you responsibility, we will ask you to represent ourselves, but if you fail, then we also have the right to fire you, to recall you and fire you. But what did the leadership do?
A provision that we've never even attempted to exercise.
Maybe we should actually read it. I see Wakili has a copy of the Constitution. You know, that's a recall clause. It gives people back the power to say that, go and implement this Constitution. And if you don't, we have the right to fire you because we are your employers. No. If today, for example, your house girl or your employee steals from you, there's no kuna maneno mingi, you fire them summarily, or you even call the police, you report them. But when it comes to political leadership in this country and the implementation of the will of the people, what is the leadership? And the reason why I will push on a bigger blame on the leadership, because first of all, it's about your country. It's about the pride you as a leader should be able to have, that I actually did this for my country to prosper, and you haven't done it. Now, the people of Kenya said, first and foremost, at chapter 6, we want you to behave yourself in a certain way. That when you occupy that office, we want to see Fred as a cabinet secretary for this. We respect, we can see him as a good person, and we can actually be proud that Fred is or Kili Macharia will be, is that person that we can be happy about. But if you don't, we again will. But what did the leadership in this country do? If you look at the Constitution of Kenya, almost every chapter, because we were avoiding a situation where we are almost prescriptive. There are many constitutions in the world, of many countries, that is just a set of principles. Some have got details on certain things. I don't know whether, Fred, you will recall, and Wakili, recall the harmonized draft Constitution of Kenya of November 2009. In that harmonized draft, we were very, we can say we are very drastic about one particular issue. Corruption in the judiciary, for example. And we were saying that, Kenyans were even saying, abolish the judiciary. Everybody must resign. And then now apply afresh. It is the judges and magistrates who called us and say, hey, guys, we are colleagues. Why are you being so punitive in this way? We said, okay, fine. The compromise is this. Let's do vetting of judges and magistrates, and we'll create a body outside to vet you guys. Actually, the vetting of judges and magistrates proposal came from the judiciary itself. But if today, as we speak, Kenyans are still crying loud that corruption is back into the judiciary. But back to the question about leadership, the role of leadership in implementing a constitution. If you look at Article 104, it says in that chapter, I think it's the legislature, that Parliament shall pass legislation to bring into effect this chapter. Now, the conniving political leadership in this country realized that, no, we will not live up to the will of the people. They passed a law that made it almost impossible for them to be recalled. Then they, secondly, went ahead and killed Chapter 6, because they passed the Leadership and Integrity Act, which made it almost impossible. And that's why you cannot be surprised today that you have a cabinet of people who are either suspected of committing certain crimes, money laundering, as you say. But it's like it's okay. And therefore, who is failing? It's not the people of Kenya. It's the person who says, I am your leader today. I know your will, what you wanted as a people, but I'm going to implement it. So when you constitute, for example, say a government that is not reflective of what the people wanted in Chapter 6 or in Article 104, I mean, honestly, who is failing who?
Well, the question, therefore, is where did the people lose their power? Because it would appear like we've created a constitution purely for the leadership, that they can do whatever it is they want. Yet it starts with we, the people. That clause you're talking about, recalling members of parliament, no one has even attempted to do this.
There's been an attempt, Fred.
Yes.
I remember, for example, I think there was some MCS in Isiolo and a few other counties that actually attempted that. But it was defeated because of the hurdles that the political class actually put in.
At what point did the people lose the power with regard to this constitution?
I think one of the is starting with that article. In essence, what it's saying, it is the people who employ the elected leaders. So, in essence, the basic understanding of employment-employer relationship, the employer can decide when to fire an employee. So that article, looking critically on that article, it says that the people can recall their leader when they feel there are some grounds for them to exercise that right. But then it goes further to say the leaders will craft a law setting out the grounds upon which that right can be exercised. You see, it's a give and take. And you see, it makes it very impossible, very difficult for the people on their own volition, unless they are involved in the crafting of the grounds upon which a leader can be recalled. Two, when you look at the accountability mechanism created by the Constitution, we have a number of them. And we can start with the commissions. When you look at the functionality and the operations of the commissions, by and large, we cannot see the autonomous commissions, the independence commissions as envisaged in the Constitution. Why is that not the case? Because these commissions, for them to perform, still, though they are dependent and independent on book, in terms of the operations, it's very difficult for us to achieve that. We also have the independent offices. So the question we need to ask ourselves, how independent are the offices we created? The third one is the issue of the public participation. Though we have said that we, the people, need to be involved when an issue of national importance is brought on the table. We can look at it two ways. One, the issue of the leadership involving the public and the public engaging the leadership, because there is a duty on the public to participate when such an opportunity arises, because it's a value, it's one of the value that we entrench in the Constitution in Article 10. But then when that chance arises, how many people take their time to diligently engage the materials brought before them, take their time to question and to critically analyze the issues that are brought before them? And then the other hand of the argument is, how often are the leaders bringing down the agendas for discussion? And how value-based is it? So that when we want to discuss, for example, amending the Constitution, we can take, for instance, BBI. How extensive was it that people were involved? And were they comfortable? Were it not for the small group that felt the extent of the public participation that was done was not as envisaged in the Constitution, then a great number of people who, by their sheer will, they would have allowed that to slide. Yeah.
Wakili, I'll ask you to hold that thought there, because we need to take a break, and when we come back, we'll take this conversation forward now into the various attempts currently before us to amend the Constitution, and even the previous attempts that we've seen, including Punguza Mzigo and Okoa Kenya. You're watching Morning Cafe on TV47. We'll be back with this discussion with Dr. Ekuru Aukot and Wakili Paul Macharia. Don't go too far. We were just getting ready to birth the new constitution.
Yes.
And lawyer Paul Macharia is also well versed in these matters. Just before we get back to our conversation, let me just revisit our top story that is not related to this. The National Police Service is set to phase out current general duty police uniforms once it concludes public participation exercise that kicks off today in Nyeri. A team from the police headquarters will go countrywide to involve officers and the public as it seeks feedback on the latest design change. The proposed new uniforms feature a light blue shirt and navy blue pants for both genders. Additional features on the new uniform include the Kenya Police logo on the left hand and the Kenyan flag on the right. The uniform will also have inbuilt name tags that do not give police officers a room to remove. And this morning we ask, what do you think of the proposed new police uniform? Continue giving us your feedback. We'll sample some of that as we go along with this podcast. TV47 News on Twitter, or X if you like, and on Facebook, TV47 Kenya. Gentlemen, let's now take a look at some of the discussions going on. And one of the never-ending discussions is on the constitution of the IEBC, or reconstitution of the electoral body. And this goes far back as back in the 90s, meaning that we've been at this discussion for over 30 years, heading to 40 years now. And we recall the days of the IPPG, when political parties came together to decide how the electoral body then would be formed. We are seeing a situation where that even 30 plus years later, a new constitution in place, further legislation on this particular issue, we are back at political parties caucusing on how to reconstitute the IEBC, and that is what is happening at the Bomas of Kenya with the bipartisan talks. Is it a failure of this constitution because it was supposed to come and address a number of things?
Fred, a constitution can never fail. It is the people implementing the constitution that actually can fail. And that's why in constitutional speak, we talk of the letter and the spirit of the constitution. Where the letter is not very clear, the spirit must kick in to say, okay, what was the intention of the framers of the constitution? When, for example, they said that we want an independent IEBC. So just before we go to the nitty-gritties of what that means, I think one of the major challenges we have in our constitution today, in the implementation of our constitution today, is the politicization of implementation of the constitution. It's the politicization of our constitution. Because, and actually, not just politicization, actually the personalization. That there are certain individuals in this country who have got a sense of entitlement. That whenever you talk about the constitution, we need to think about ourselves. How do we get into those positions of power? And that was the main essence of BBI, the Building Bridges Initiative, and I'm happy that it died. Now, when we were making this constitution, Fred, I must confess, there was a level of naivety that we honestly believed that Kenya was in the cusp of renewal. That everybody knew, because we had come from the post-election violence of 2007, 2008. And therefore, there was that sort of emotional agitation. I think we need a new constitutional order, because the agitation for a new change, new constitution goes back as, goes back as the time of seeking independence from the colonial powers up to 1992, for example. You remember the agitation for repeal of Section 2A that actually brought in multi-party democracy. Then, of course, you've got, remember the story of the Young Turks, Kina Raila, Kina Nani, Muite at that time. So that history, when we were now doing this constitution, actually factored so much on what we want to put now in the 2010 Constitution. And that's why I'm saying there was that level of naivety that we actually believed Kenya was changing, and that if we put this Constitution together, then we will have leaders who will implement it. And you should also recall that after the post-election violence and the death of about 1,200 Kenyans from that post-election violence, and of course the ICC trials, so Kenyans were like, okay, no, we need to fix our country. And to fix our country, we need to give ourselves this document that we all own. But also in doing that, can we also have a certain leadership that can actually reflect into it? So that for me is what I can generally describe as naivety. But we forgot as Kenyans that when you put you put your goats in the same pen with an hyena, and if your goat is eaten you come and find out that your goat has been eaten the following day, you can't really blame the hyena because that is in their nature. So we go back to the question, okay, who are we entrusting with this constitution? Mm-hmm. You know, the constitution cannot fail on its own because constitution is as good as the paper it's written on. But it requires now those mechanisms. And now let's go back to the question of, say, IEBC. The Constitution speaks of independent bodies. I think it's chapter 15, if I'm not wrong. Independent constitutional commissions, and you know. What does that word independent mean? If we give you a job, will you accept to be manipulated in the delivery of that job? That's the question we should be asking. And that's why in our own constitution, we talk of accountability of office holders, and that's in Article 10. So you, as a commissioner, of IEBC commissioner, or the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, or whatever, or other commissions, how responsible are you towards the people of Kenya in implementing this constitution? And that's the bigger question. But one of the challenges we must recognize is that how are these commissions being created? I mean, not created, appointed. The commissioner is being appointed. There is a political process. Because now it has become the norm, and it's nowhere in the constitution, that, for example, when you do an interview of commissioners, you must submit 3 names. A recruiting agency. Well, why should you submit 3 names? Because the political class wants to manipulate who is it that we can actually put there so that he can speak our. Let's pick an example. The Salaries and Remuneration Commission, for example. Kenyans were very vocal that why are public servants paying themselves so much money from our taxes, and yet we don't see any benefit? So they said, we want a body outside the political class that can actually relook at the whole question of compensation and remuneration and be fair to every public servant. But look at the way who they appoint in those commissions. If it, like Wakili said, when it is something about that benefits them, they don't discuss it. For example, in the Finance Act of 2023, President William Ruto pretends that now we can look at this act. But when he was signing the act, did he not see a provision that says increases his salaries and that of MPs? Obviously, it was there. Did the Attorney General actually advise him? So the challenge for me is not the Constitution, and we cannot say the Constitution of our country or Kenya has failed. It is the political failure, the leadership failure in this country that's undermining everything. And I am not surprised, Fred and Wakili Macharia, that military coups are now almost becoming a feature in Africa. In fact, I've followed very keenly what's happening in Guinea, Mali, Burkina Faso, and now Niger. Because now there's a bigger question on the table, that you are a democratically elected government pursuant to the will of the people, which is in the Constitution. You swear to protect that will of the people. But if you don't do it, then now there's a bigger brother knocking on the door and saying, no, I don't think you, we agree with you. And I've seen, even you can see even reports now, the people of Niger are fully behind the military leaders. Burkina Faso, I'm not saying, advocating actually that in Kenya we go that route, but there is a question on the table that if you are a democratically elected or constitutionally elected government, then implement the will of the people. You could see, you can now see, Fred, and I'm sorry I'm taking too long on this issue, because you have to draw examples. If President William Ruto honestly believed, and I personally believe he won, whether, that's a question of legitimacy or legality, that question was settled when the Supreme Court finally announced him as the winner. Why then is he entertaining some of these useless talks at Bomas of Kenya?
Okay.
Yep.
Yet the talks could be serving a purpose and will be coming
No,
to
it
that.
is serving a political purpose, but not a purpose to benefit the people of Kenya. I'll tell you this.
Let's allow Wakili to come in on this.
Before Wakili comes,
briefly.
Let me just say, if in the amendment of any law or constitution, you do not establish what is the common good for society, you cannot say there is a constitutional moment. And that's the problem I have with the so-called bipartisan Bomas talks.
But didn't we allow, and this came early on, the politicians to dip their hand into the constitution-making process. Because when we had of the Bomas draft, then there was another Naivasha meeting. And a lot of things were caucused between politicians in an environment where members of the public were not welcome. And that probably is what led to the document we have. Can we really blame the politicians' involvement right now? And they're thinking that they, without involving the public, could actually change a lot of things, including the constitution of the IEBC, the way they want it.
So thank you. And just to capture maybe differently, one of the challenge we have, and one of the biggest problem, which I think is the elephant in the room, is the issue of the constitutionalism of the Constitution. And this is not a new issue. Of course, looking at the previous authors and professors, for example, when you look at the works of Professor Okoth-Ogeto, when he was discussing about the politics in Africa and about the paradox of the politics, he stated that the issue we have is not the Constitution as a document per se, but the issue we have is the constitutionalism of the organs created by the Constitution. Maybe said differently, or in simple words, are the people elected, whether in the public office, whether in other organs created by the Constitution, can they live the spirit of the Constitution? Can they do what the Constitution expects of them? And of course, that has led to a debate between two divides. One, we have the elitism debate, where there are some individuals who think anything or any change to any constitutive document, whether the law, whether the Constitution, whether the policies, it ought to serve them, or it ought to prioritize their interest. And then there is another side of the debate, where we are talking about egalitarianism, where we are talking about equality, we are talking about equity, we are talking about social justice. And then we are also talking about the common good. So this has been the issue, where there has been a class of people that feel more entitled than the others. Then there is a class of people who feel there should be equality and equity in terms of the distribution of power, resources, and opportunities. Then when the drivers of the changes, and of course this also boils down to the debate of whether does the law, does the social change follow the law, or does the law follow the social change? Do we need to follow what the Constitution says, or the Constitution needs to follow what we want and what we say? As Daktari said, the Constitution is made, it's a good document, but then we have to ask ourselves, what is the motive beside or behind the intimation to change? One, is it to yourself, is it a self-serving need, or is it a need for the benefit of the society? That has been the issue. And the drivers, most of which are the political class, more often than not, they prioritize their own interest at the expense of the interests that affect the majority of Kenyans. But what do we Kenyans do? At times, we just ignore, or at times we just despair. For example, I have heard previously that notwithstanding the non-availability of the position of the office of the official opposition leader in the Constitution, people are saying, let them do what they want to do. All we want is to move on. Mm-hmm. You see, not even being concerned on what did we allow them to do by the Constitution. We are now saying we don't care what they do. All we want is to move on. Not knowing, by not caring, we are ceding ground to them to do as they wish. Okay. And then this brings the problem, because when the issues turn bad, we start blaming them. Yet, from the first inception of the issues, we allow them to do as they wish, because we feel they are bothering us.
Once again, the people relinquishing their power.
Can I have a quick
to the
rejoinder to that?
Yes.
Wakili, I think, let me differ slightly with you. I don't think the people are allowing the political class to do as they wish. There is, I think, legitimate expectation that as my leader, or as a, let's even pick the analogy of just a parent. You know, you are in your house. I think your children expect of you to look after them, take good care of them, make sure that they go to school, they sleep well, they eat. That's a legitimate expectation. And I think it's no different from the legitimate expectation in the political leadership of a country. Now, you made a very fundamental point, which is that the entitlement. And that brings me to, Fred, a very bigger subject that I hope you guys in the media could continue. We now need to shift away from the talk of civic education to political education. Mm-hmm. We need to tell Kenyans, what do you understand about the politics of your country, especially in the choice of leaders and in what you expect of the leader. For example, Wakili has hinted the question of leader of opposition. That's a lack of political education. Why? Because there is actually no need to speak about it in the first instance. We should not be wasting our time. Because if you look at the National Parliament of Kenya, the leadership already is created. Who is the leader of majority is the people actually who form the government. The minority are actually in opposition. And Kenyans ought to understand that you cannot create an office for someone because of how revered that person is. And I have nothing against anybody. But that talk of leader of political opposition is misplaced because we have not understood our constitution very well. Because if we understood our constitution today, we should be expecting, excuse me, we should be expecting Opio and I to be able to be tabling an alternative policy document or motion to that of the government of the day. When government of the day says, we will pass the Finance Act with or without amendment or a comma, it is Opio and I, who is the leader of minority in that National Assembly, to counter the argument of Kimani Ichung'wah, the leader of majority, to say, no, Kimani, this is our alternative, and then present that to the people of Kenya. When people say, for example, that let's collect, Azimio says that we will collect 15 million or even whatever number of million signatures to remove the president out of office, that's political ignorance. Mm-hmm. Because there is nowhere in our constitution that you can even collect 50 million signatures, and remove the president of Kenya. Mm-hmm. There are structures. IEBC declared him the president. You challenged it. You went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said, no, he is still the elected president. Okay. So that is lack of that in education, political or civic otherwise. And that's why the Constitution is very clear that we must all protect our Constitution. What does that mean? Part of protecting our Constitution is respecting the Constitution. Mm-hmm. Yeah? So that when we invoke certain provisions in our Constitution, we are actually saying we are invoking our will. Okay. So I do strongly believe that I hope we can continue this conversation more. Yeah. How much do Kenyans understand of their own constitution, so much so that they can also now question who is it that we are putting in that public office, mm-hmm, based on the constitution to realize our will.
Gentlemen, I want us now to move away from the issue of implementation, mm-hmm, to what we are now attempting to engage in, amending the Constitution. Mm-hmm. We know the process going on at Bomas of Kenya, and we've made mention of it. There have been previous attempts at popular initiatives, mm-hmm, to amend the Constitution, notably Punguza Mzigo, of which Dr. Ekuru Aukot knows a lot more about, Okoa Kenya, even the BBI to some extent, vis-a-vis the parliamentary route that we see a number of politicians attempting. In fact, there have been quite a number of attempts through Parliament to change a number of things in the Constitution. And it begs a question. Do we understand what the provisions of the law in as far as amending it is concerned? The feeling at Bomas is that whatever exercise they're engaging in, they do not have to involve the general public in that discussion, and that they can actually just through Parliament achieve whatever they want. We're seeing now another initiative hoping to ride on the political movement. But this is a popular initiative. Do even Kenyans understand the difference between these two approaches to changing the constitution, Wakili?
Thank you. And one of the greatest vantage position by the constitution is that it made it not easy to change the constitution as a document. So far, so good. We have had around, I think, 4 attempts to amend the constitution. That can be understood in comparison to the attempts, whether successful or not, that were made in the 1963 Constitution. In the 1963 Constitution, there were around 30 amendments made in the Constitution. And then when you look at the Constitution that we have now, it has set out some of the parameters, the ground rules, and the ground provisions that, 1, the Parliament can amend, and 2, the Parliament cannot amend. It has to go back to the people. And I think that was one of the biggest questions in the BBI debate, that can we have an amendment that tries to change the structure? Or do we have a structure in the Constitution that we cannot amend? And of course, when, for example, that can be understood in context. In Kenya, we have 3 arms of the government. We have the legislature, we have the executive, and then we have the judiciary. Now, when there is,
then
of
we
course,
have the independent officers.
yes, when we want to change the constitution, by the reading of the constitution, it doesn't say that you cannot change the constitution. What it has done, it has included some fundamental parameters that has to be included for you to change the constitution. For example, there are some provisions, if you have to change, you have to involve the people. That cannot go through the parliament. For 1, if we are to change the limit, the term limit of a president, that cannot be done by the parliament. If we are to change the issue of the boundaries that we have as a country, that cannot be done by the parliament. If we are to have any change that speaks to the supremacy of the constitution, that has to be done through the referendum. If you have to change any provisions that relates to the Bill of Rights, that's chapter 4, which is one of the progressive provisions, or the chapter that this constitution brought, that cannot be done by the parliamentary initiative, but through the referendum. So, in essence, the people have been given power, great power, which read in understanding and with in line with the provisions of Article 1, where they have the supreme authority to change. What that means, if there is any fundamental change to the structure of the constitution, they have to be involved. If there are other changes that may not be fundamental to the structure of the constitution, the parliament can change. Okay. Then every amendment has to be looked in context. When we want, for example, to create the office of the opposition leader, now where do we place that? Because the structure of our constitution is clear. We have 3 arms of the government. We have the judiciary, the legislature, and the executive. Will it be an office under the executive, an office in the legislature, or will it be an independent office? What is the nature of that office? Then that, by and large, changes the structure. If that is to happen, then we have to go back to the people. So when you're talking about the popular initiative, this is a people-driven initiative. One of the questions that was asked, and this the proponents of the BBI could not answer, who are the proponents? Who are pushing, who are behind the change? It was clear that if you are in the parliament, the route that you can take to change the constitution is the parliamentary route. If you are not in the parliament, the route you can change is through the popular initiative. Then you become the promoter. then the parliamentarian cannot be saying to be the promoters of the popular initiative. And I think the challenge has been, and I think this ought to be one of the guiding role when we want to have the fully implemented constitution, is the issue of public emancipation about the document, not only to the people, but also to the leaders. Because sometimes they cannot be able to implement what they do not know. They'll end up making some sentimental pronouncement just to make people happy, notwithstanding those provisions cannot stand the light of the day.
Okay.
So the Constitution at least is very clear in terms of what ought to be followed. And when you talk about public participation, it's not a mere public participation. The courts have laid down the test for an effective public participation.
Okay, and even for the popular initiative, an example being the Punguza Mzigo, where you collected more than 1 million signatures as required by the IEBC, but we saw that...
As required by our constitution.
As required by the constitution, ratified by the IEBC.
Yes.
The issue of without obvious political goodwill, even a popular initiative will find serious hurdles. So the politicians still have a say, even on the popular initiative.
And I think that's one of the biggest questions we must continue to address in our country, that may not actually be the people actually who fail, who fail in their responsibility in the constitution. It is the leadership of our country. It's the political leadership. Like Wakili has ably, described, and I don't want to repeat it. If you read, for example, from Article 255, because that is Chapter 16 of our Constitution, amendment to this Constitution, we realized as the Committee of Experts when we were writing this, because our Constitution, by the way, is just a negotiated agreement. Especially during that time of making it. It's negotiation, do I want this, do I want that? Remember from the Bomas process, there was even a proposal for 4 levels of government. There was national, regional, district, and locational level of government. But now when it came to the Committee of Experts, where I was the CEO, we asked ourselves, but you know what, the cost of running this government is so huge. Can Kenyans actually afford this? And that's how we settled on 2 levels of government. The national and the county government. But what Kenyans also do not know, that because of the political power, there is another level of government called, we try to remove it from the constitution, called provincial administration. But now they have brought it back as regional this, regional that. It interferes with the direct relationship between the 2 levels of government, because Article 6 of the Constitution speaks about the need for cooperation and consultation between the 2 levels of government, and even talks at Article 187 about the transfer of functions from one level of government to another level of government, if that function can be effectively realized in that level. And that begins to question why, for example, does a national organ wield so much power or so much resources, yet that resource is needed at that location, at that every part of the Republic of Kenya. And this is why now I think your question is very important, Fred. We still will have to apportion a bigger blame to the political class, and the political class in this country, first of all, they do not want to read this Constitution, or they have never read it, or they don't understand it. Like Akila said, if you want to change, for example, the structure of government, this is not something that you take to the Bomas of Kenya and discuss it. You have to go to the people. When we were promoting the Punguza Mzigo Constitutional Amendment in 2019, we went to the people. We got about 1.4 million signatures. IEBC verified, said, it's 1.2 million. Okay, we had met the threshold of 1 million anyway. But when this bill, constitutionally, by the way, and to be honest with you, I believe the Punguza Mzigo bill never failed. Actually, it never failed, because, again, if you look at Article 257, the process, the bill was taken to all the 47 county assemblies of Kenya, okay? And it's a requirement of them to debate it and return a verdict. Now, only, I think, 20, I can't remember correctly, only I think 20 counties, county assemblies returned the verdict. The rest remained quiet. And if you don't do that within a time frame that is in the Constitution, it means the bill has sailed through. But who actually sabotaged? I wouldn't say Funguza Mizigo failed. Who sabotaged that? It is the political class in this country. President Uhuru Kenyatta and his political brother Raila Amolo Odinga are the ones who ganged up and intimidated the county assemblies to say, do not even discuss. In fact, I couldn't even go to any county assembly in Luo Nyanza because the instructions were very clear. You cannot host those people. Yet the law requires that the promoters of the bill actually can come and address the county assembly. And we did that in about 20 something. We went to 27 county assemblies. But their county assemblies could not even step in. Why? Because of patronization, how those county assemblies are being patronized politically by individuals. So when we assess the success of this constitution, we must be able to also bring on the table who are the people who are actually sabotaging the realization of the will of the people. And you have to go back to the political class. And going back to the political class, we must also now ask the people of Kenya, why are you being patronized? Because it's your will that's being undermined. So because the Constitution allows amendment from Article 255, 256, which is what's called parliamentary initiative, and 257, which is the popular initiative. So
doesn't it therefore mean that
any
popular initiative in Kenya will encounter the same challenge? That the political, unless the political class agrees to the whatever the proposals.
I think, Fred, we need to go beyond just that. Yes, I know there's a political, and we have already established that there is this sense of entitlement from certain individuals, certain political class that is about the country is about them. But now it begs a bigger debate and a bigger question. Who then are we entrusting with the leadership of our country? Because whoever we entrust with the leadership of our country will either promote our will in the Constitution or undermine it. And we have a responsibility as a people every 5 years to begin to ask critical questions to those individuals. And in fact, this is perhaps maybe one of the things that we overlooked in the writing of this Constitution. Why is it that every 5 years we are actually vetting the performance of political class, but we are not vetting the performance of independent political offices, including the other arms, one of the arms of government, which is the judiciary. Although we proposed, and it is there in the Constitution, that we must vet judges and magistrates. But my view is that we kind of overlooked that. It should have been a continuous exercise. The same way we are vetting the executive arm of government every 5 years and the legislature, we also ought to have said, even every 5 years, we must look at the performance of a judge or a magistrate. And if they have not done that, then, because if you look at the chapter on the judiciary, there are certain principles. Okay. There's a certain duties required of them, but we don't question them.
Now we are in a situation where we have a possible bipartisan parliamentary approach to constitution review, and a popular initiative, and it's unfortunate that Dr. Kalua Green couldn't make it to studio this morning. A popular initiative to do the same. The issues are more or less the same. The interests could differ. What the politicians believe is key to Kenyans, probably Kenyans think different. So which way to go?
So depending on the issue at hand, as Daktari has said, Article 255, 256 and 257 have set out clearly the issues and the route to be taken. And we've said, if, for example, let's just step back a bit and look at, for example, the BBI. That the BBI failed doesn't mean some of the suggestions in the bill cannot be implemented at all. The reason why it failed, because there are some fundamental constitutional thresholds that it did not meet. If, for example, if we want to change an independent office, for example, IEBC, it is an independent office provided or set out in the Constitution. The Constitution then that being an independent office, you cannot just without following the due process change, because when you change that as an independent office and an independent organ per se, you are changing the structure of the constitution in terms of the provision. Because if, for example, today we want to change the IABC, which is an independent, by the letters of the constitution, it ought to be independent commission. If we want to change it, do we allow the players to decide? I think I can analogize this. In a football match, are the players to choose the referee, or are some of the key players or key teams to choose the referee? Or who is to choose the referee? Understanding that this referee is not only to oversee your match, but all the other matches to be played. Mm-hmm. If, for example, today the current wins forces a change in the supervision's mechanisms on how elections are conducted because of their grievances, which they have taken through the route that is set in the Constitution. If today we change the office holders of IABC because we think or we feel they never favored us or they were discriminate against us, and then tomorrow, without focusing on the operationalization of the office, that means even tomorrow, another player, another team will come, and when they are disgruntled with the operations of the referee, they are going to change. Mm-hmm. And I think this has been the issue. And I said elitism is one of problem we have, more so within the political class, because the entitlement that is associated with them makes them to pull the cards in terms of changing and the route that the political and the national discourse ought to take. Mm-hmm. Inversely, what ought to drive the changes we want? It is the values that we want in the Constitution. If, for example, we are saying we are changing the scrutiny mechanisms of the commissioners of the IABC, we are focusing on increasing the independence, increasing the integrity, increasing the accountability of the office of the IABC. That would be a good suggestion, because it means no matter who is the player, no matter which are the teams, we expect that the outcomes will be fair, will be just, and will be equitable. Okay. But when we focus on the game, that particular game, and we want to change all the rules because we feel the referee has not been fair to us, we are only focusing on the symptoms, mm-hmm. not the bottom line of the problem. If the issue is that the independence of IABC is questionable, then the question we should ask ourselves, how can we as Kenyans make the IABC and other commissions more autonomous, more independent, more accountable, and more transparent? Okay. Because that will solve the problems, the perennial problems of the disgruntlement within the elite class.
And Fred, yes. Just to jump on that point, if we are really to be able to say, to institutionalize IABC as proposed by the people of Kenya and as per Chapter 7 and the IABC Act, let's take Kenyans back to 2017 when the election of President Uhuru Kenyatta was nullified. And the Supreme Court found out that there were actually illegalities and irregularities committed in the transmission of results. Mm-hmm. But we did not go a step further to say who actually committed those illegalities and irregularities. Mm-hmm. And can we hold them accountable as per the law? Because they must have committed, obviously, electoral offenses. So why were those people, whoever it is, not investigated mm-hmm. and not charged in a court of law? Because an electoral offense is criminal in nature. But we went ahead and said, okay, let's go and repeat the election. Fair enough, we had to repeat the election because Article 140, Article 3 calls for a fresh election. But we never punished the people who offended our constitution. Mm-hmm. And this is, and let's be very clear again here. Today, if you steal a chicken from a neighbor, you probably quickly be arrested by the police and you'll be charged, you'll probably go to prison. Or if you rob me or you violently pick my mulika mwizi on the streets of Nairobi, that is robbery with violence under our penal code. But imagine people who violate the will of the people, the Constitution. So I think one of the debates we need to have going forward, Fred, is that we need to begin to criminalize a violation of the Constitution, especially by the political leadership or even by the people.
Okay.
Now, to the question of implementation, it's not rocket science, Fred. Implementation of any constitution in the world can be achieved through three means: administratively, and this is exactly what some of the things that the government has been doing, or through policy mechanisms, or through legislation. So, whereas it's okay to talk about amending the constitution, and I think like Wakili Macharia has said, what really is the issue on the table that really requires sort of an amendment, a review, or even an overhaul of a constitution? How can we measure the administrative policy and legal mechanisms that have been put in place to realize this will? I think we may need to begin there.
Okay.
But that also requires that the office holders, people given responsibility and duties under this constitution, how are they performing? Because the Constitution, for example, requires that every year, the President must give out a State of the Nation address. And before, Fred, we've run away from this. And I hope you guys are not being monitored. People should
by
be,
who? We are monitored by the statutory bodies mandated to monitor.
We must be able now to put on the public discourse the utterances by President William Ruto when he was in Western Kenya. For me, I saw a violation of the Constitution, an impunity. It's fair enough, and the President in a way personalized and say, I will either send you, I think kuna vitu tatu, I will either send you to jail. He cannot do that. He doesn't have those powers. He's not the judiciary. But why does he speak like that so boldly? Or I will send you to heaven, whatever the case may be, or you must leave the country. If I'm a Kenyan, I don't care. I don't care about Mr. Rai's problems. And yes, I'm a bit privy about some of the things that he's done, and I will not disclose it here. Because even the devil deserves represent or certain level of treatment. But when the president of a country who took the Bible and saw by the Constitution can now speak recklessly like that, we need really to begin to go, okay, what do we expect of our leaders? Can our leader today, and again, I can invoke chapter 60 and say, why should my president leader speak like that? Do I now respect actually that office the way he speaks? Because
it is a legitimate question.
It's a legitimate question.
It is actually featuring on the front page of the dailies today, meaning that it is something that people will talk about. But let's not escape from the opportunity. But I want us to look at it from the aspect of a constitutionalism. Because like Wakili said, constitutionalism, in simple words, is basically the culture. How do we, it's a value system. But the question now is, with whatever is going on at Bomas of Kenya, is it a legitimate expectation that with the kind of discussions, whether wide or narrow, because the issues are varied, some of them are major and huge, electoral reforms, inclusivity, and CDF, which may not be considered as big as the other discussions. Is it a legitimate expectation by Kenyans that process could lead to a popular initiative to change the constitution? Or is it a process that purely politicians will take part in, and whatever result Kenyans will have to live with?
So I think it is. The answer is to the affirmative. But then we have to ask ourselves, of course, when the leadership comes into position, they are supposed to be our representative. Being our representative, when it comes to the needs, there are some needs that are more superior than the others. There are some needs that are more basic than other needs. Now, I casually look at the issues that are under discussion. Let's say from the government side, how much or how far are the issues to the concern of Kenyans? One, the reconstitution of IEBC. We have the creation of the office of official opposition leader. On the other hand, but from the Kenya, the Azimio, they're talking about the cost of living. Then we ask ourselves, the government, when we are electing the government, there is what we call the social contract, which leads to the expectation that one, this government, it is to serve our needs. People have so many needs. Then it is the government, and by us electing the government and paying taxes to it, we give it authority to craft policies that are going to prioritize our problems so that we are not prone to the national issues and pandemics. So we look at what are the preferential treatments on the issues that are on the table. One of the key issues that is affecting Kenyans now, I believe, besides the issue of the cost of living, we also have the issue of the corruption and mismanagement of public resources, and also the effective performance of the office holders. What is the government doing to the individuals who they are abrogating their roles and misusing the public funds for their personal gains? What is the government doing to the devolved corruption at the county level? What is the government doing to the persons who have been alleged to have committed offenses and they are still serving? Mm-hmm. What is the message being sent? So I think the issue we have, and of course, this is the society, and I said about the social change and the law. We cannot say we will never change the Constitution. Mm-hmm. And we cannot be asking whether we'll change the Constitution or not. The question will be, what do we need to change? Are the prevailing needs at the moment?
And curiously, those prevailing needs that you point out are not necessarily before the team at Bomas of Kenya. And then, as you give your final comments because of time,
yes.
We talk about that as well. The fact that we have a popular initiative process initiated by Dr. Kalua Greenpilo Lumumba and his team. And they've actually pointed out some of the things you talk about, issues of governance and the like, which are not before the team at Bomas. At what point do we have a convergence of this? Things. If at all you're going to have a referendum, they're not going to be two. Yeah? As you give your final comments.
Yes, then what this leads us then to how genuine are the discussions and the negotiations? How genuine are they? And what is the need that ought to be served? If it is to serve some specific needs, not geared towards the common good, even if when it comes to the issue of the amendment by the referendum or the parliamentary initiative, the best medicine ought to be, then those suggestions ought to be desisted. Mm-hmm. But if it's that which is to help the great need, the utility, the greatest majority, if it is that the agenda that is brought on the table, then I mean, that is something we can embrace. Because the Kenyans, we need to be very, very critical in discerning how genuine are the discussions and how genuine are the products of the discussions. Mm-hmm. Are we going to benefit in any way by the products of the negotiations? Mm-hmm. As Kenyans?
Yet even remedying political issues is a need that Kenyans have as well, for us to be able to move on. Finally,
I think for me, I'll say this finally, that we have to reflect on the kind of leadership that we have in our country today. Because speaking of the Constitution and expectation of it being realized will be a rhetorical talk if we put in the wrong people in charge of these offices, where there's government of the day, legislators, and of course even the judiciary and other independent offices. Because it is these people, the way the way they implement the Constitution, or go about their duties, is what constitutes actually the implementation of the Constitution, and therefore, consequently, the realization of the goals in the Constitution. So I think it's time Kenyans actually have a serious, robust debate. And just not to repeat what Wakili has said, really we must look at the issue. What is the value addition, for example, from Bomas? What is the value addition to me as a Kenyan? Will I be able to say that the outcome of Bomas process, whatever it is, and for me I call them useless talks. It's a waste of our time, it's a waste of money, because these people are refusing to engage on issues on the floor of the House where we have actually employed them to engage on those issues, but they are instead taking side issues. And I really hope that the government of the day, in my honest opinion, had a serious plan, and that it was going to implement this plan as they said. Because all these things are sideshows. It's actually, I think, because you can see, instead of, for example, implementing the promises, the political promises of 2022, the president and his deputy and his cabinet are already back on the campaign track. And it's shameful, because I wish Kenyans can begin to see the proceeds of a new government. But that we are not seeing. Instead, it's politicking. I mean, there's nothing wrong with politics, but politics has to be meaningful to society. It has to be meaningful to the people. Today, honestly, the way I'm seeing it, is too much negative political energy in our country. And I think this is a conversation we really must have going forward. Okay. Now, what do these talks mean? What do these politicking mean for us as a country? It's a big debate, Fred, and I'm sure we cannot exhaust it today.
Thank you so much, Wakili Paul Macharia and Dr. Ekuru Aukot, Constitution expert, and also party leader of the Third Way Alliance, helping us understand the Constitution 13 years on. It is a big conversation this whole week, having just marked 13 years since the promulgation of the Constitution on Sunday, and this conversation will definitely continue. How much of the Constitution do you understand? For now, let me hand you over to my colleague Flora Limuki for some feedback on the day's question, which we're asking, what do you think? What do you think of the proposed new police uniform? Continue sharing your feedback on TV47 News on X and on Facebook, TV47 Kenya. Flora, over to you.
I'm seeing very interesting comments here, and Okot there is laughing as well as Macharia, so I'd be interested to know what they think about these new uniforms. But Kenya and Suku anasema, Adamson Muriki says, what we need is police service and welfare improved, because that's what matters. And Fred Nalenya says that the most urgent need for them, let them be changed. This is how leadership is serious with their issues. And Chris Kanyari says the police uniform debate is a diversionary tactic to confuse the public on failed police service. And Davis Nyagaka, our problem is as a country is not police uniform but police reforms. What they ought to stand for, they always do amazing job. Waongezwe salary, hiyo pesa ya uniform mpya. And bro Nyoisa says let them wear whatever they want, they still remain the same police. We all know. And Godfrey, some cartels are in government who want to use police uniform to make money, and they were in previous government importing uniforms from China. And Edward Opani, we need to focus on changing police attitudes and behavior. This is a conduct for people in this regime to make money from police uniform tenders. And Robert Momanyi, someone is going to be awarded the tender, nothing else. How will changing uniform how is it going to improve police service delivery? It's time for KK shareholders to... And Kaka Bena says, how is police uniform a concern to us? How is it going to reduce the cost of living? Quite interesting views there from Kenyans. And Asiko Ondigo says, the uniforms the police used to have before they were given to the Chinese uniforms were the best. You could feel the presence of a cop. Hii ingine doesn't instill fear. They've rolled out new uniforms again, and still the old ones will remain better. Yeah, and finally, Kalonji says this is just a wastage of public resources. Even every government in place is busy charging police uniform for whose benefits. Fred, that's what we have from here, and the comments are thousands of them. I'll be interested to know what Mashari and Ekuru thinks about them.
Okay, I'll be asking you your feedback on that, but before that, that was your take. Let's get our take here at TV47. Now, the National Police Service yesterday unveiled its proposed new uniform and has invited opinions from citizens on the new colors officers will wear. It wasn't long ago, back in 2018, that the same service last underwent a fashion change. The reason behind the frequent shifts is a valid concern worth pondering. Do these frequent aesthetic changes truly lead to any palpable improvement in the functioning of the police or its relationship with the citizens it serves? One must acknowledge that uniforms can play a symbolic role. They can reflect the evolving ethos of an institution and can even serve to signify a change in approach or attitude. However, the core issues Kenyans face lies much deeper than appearances. The public's concerns primarily revolve around transparency, accountability, and professionalism. Within the police, cases of police brutality, corruption, and misuse of power have unfortunately been recurrent issues that overshadow the significance of a new uniform. If the police service wishes to address public sentiment and establish a more positive connection with the citizens, it must focus on concrete actions, building trust through community engagement, effective training programs, transparent internal investigations, and a commitment to upholding human rights should be at the forefront of any reform efforts. A uniform change, while visually impactful,